and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben, and with me is...
Matthew Patel. Did you get my email?
You picked Matthew Patel?
I laugh so hard every time he's like, Mr. Pilgrim. I'm just, it's hilarious. But that is not my name. My name is Jim, and this week we watched Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Or Versus, I don't know. Is it verse or versus?
I think it's versus the world, personally, but hey, look, I could be very wrong on this.
Look, it was your pick, Ben, so why don't you hit us with a synopsis of the magical, mythical events of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World?
Can do. Keeping it very simple, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a 2010 action comedy directed by Edgar Wright. Based on the graphic novel series by Brian Lee O'Malley, the story follows Scott Pilgrim, a slacker and bassist in a small band, who falls for Ramona Flowers. However, to win her heart, Scott must defeat her 7 evil exes, each with their own unique powers and personalities. The film blends romance, video game-inspired action, and quirky humor as Scott navigates his relationships and battles his way through a series of wild, surreal confrontations. And maybe he'll even grow up a little on the way.
Nice. Maybe he will. Hit us with some stats, because what you're going to find, or what you've probably already found, is the stats for this film are unusual.
Yeah, there's some hedging of bets in some of these stats. So, directed by Edgar Wright, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End. Written by Michael Bacall and Edgar Wright. Starring Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Kieran Culkin, Chris Evans, Anna Kendrick, Alison Pill, Brandon Routh, and Jason Schwartzman. A budget of between 60 and 85 million, and a return of $51.7 million. 2 things are odd about this film. 1, that box office return, and 2, the year of release is odd, because this movie had a staggered release all across the world in very weird fashion. So there's normally in Wikipedia you get sometimes you'll get a festival release, and then you'll get a US release. But this one had a festival release, a Japan release, an American release, a UK release. It kind of went the gamut, which was a bit odd. But yeah, I don't know if that was what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's I'm talking about that. I'm talking specifically about the box office and the release structure. And I'm also talking about the cast. So these 2 things. So basically, to your point, let's talk about the box office and the release structure. This was a film which was a big swing. And they knew it was a big swing, which is why they were trying to be somewhat careful about the way they presented it to the world. So it was a bit unusual for a film of this budget, which was, it's not high, but it's in that realm of we're well out of indie festivals. We've really got to make some money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what they were trying for, they figured that this film would be a hit, on the DVD market, and it would be in that sort of culty kind of realm, cult film realm, which is to say it would be this slow burner release that lots of people would love, but they still had to do a wide release because of the amount of money that they spent making it. So they ended up with this almost sort of tour kind of promotional strategy to try and tap into that. As to whether or not that was successful is hard to say. It was huge on home release and DVD, just as it was expected to be. But again, that price point was high to not make an initial return. So there's a lot about it which is sort of strange in that sense. And it's a little bit hard to quantify in terms of success or failure on a purely monetary level, because they kind of knew the film was a bit offbeat, a bit weird, but also it needed that price point to be made in this way, because there's so many unique things about it, which I'm sure we'll get into. Second thing I wanted to talk about was you could not get this cast for that price in today's dollars. Do you know what I mean?
No, it's definitely a cast of rookies, or not even rookies, mid-carders who went on to be big things.
It's everyone's, not everyone, but everyone's a name now, in that cast. And it's so cool to see all of these people in one movie all together and all so young at the time. I just think, yeah, it's something special for that. It's like even parts that have just a few lines. It's like, hey, it's so and so. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and oh, can you believe it's such and such? You know, like, so it's super fun to actually look at that cast now and go, wow, everybody went on to massive things. You know, this was right before Chris Evans was sort of breaking with Captain America. You know, it was like right around that time. So yeah, look, that was my sort of two weigh-ins on the actual sort of behind the scenes release of the movie. But look, you were somehow, and I don't really know how, on the fence about the film. And what's your thoughts now, having watched it again?
Yeah, so when I started watching this movie last night, I texted you and said, I don't know what I was thinking. This movie's rad. By about 3/4 in, I remembered why this movie is a frustration for me, depending on the mood I am in. And that is the character of Scott.
I thought you were going to say that.
He sucks as a human being. And look, it just, as I said, it would depend on my mood with how much that character affects me. He is, by all intents and purposes, he's not a villain, but he is like the creator of his own misery in a way that, they kind of fluff it up a little bit in this movie so it doesn't really sit on him too much. But like there are characters throughout this movie, his sister and his best friend, for example, who are like, hey man, you're doing it again.
Yeah.
Like, stop it. Like, they're trying to tell him, man, you're leading towards pain for you, but more importantly, pain for others. And as I said, the movie doesn't sit in that, but it definitely doesn't avoid it either. And I think that's the key thing here. Like, it is a very fun movie. Like, it is fun on a stick. Like, if you could purchase it, it's definitely like you were saying about like it's a movie that was made knowing it had an audience and knowing it had a struggle to capture an audience outside of itself because it is so targeted at not even just a type of film goer, it's targeted at a specific age of film goer,
Yes.
like a very small generational gap.
It's so specific. Everything about it is so incredibly specific, which is, great for me
Yeah.
because when I think about it, like, we graduated high. We basically were Scott's age. Do you know what I mean? Like we were in that sort of 2010 kind of time. So when we sort of say it was highly specific, it was highly specific to us. Like literally, we were in our early 20s at that time, and so when I watched Scott Pilgrim versus the World, I'm like, oh, I know all of these people. Like I know every single character type and person. I was half of them. I knew the other half of them. Like, there are aspects of Scott's very frustrating personality that I can completely relate to because I'm like, that's right. I wasn't a very pleasant being either when I was in my early 20s. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't that great to be around a lot of the time, but I thought I was. So, that's kind of so when you say it's highly specific, I'm like, it was. It's just one of those things where I'm like, but it was me. So that was the kind of thing where I'm like, I'm definitely in the demo for this. Or right, perhaps I'm not now, but I remember that with nostalgia, for that time
Well, this
period.
movie is now a nostalgic time capsule. Like, it
Mm,
is like people can now watch this movie and you can know exactly what that period of time was like within pop culture. Because it is pop culture, the film. It's pop culture with music. It's pop culture with video games. It's pop culture with movie references. Like, there are even conversations in this film that we've had as far as like quips, like what's that, like in the movie a couple of times he's like, what's that a reference to, and they're like, I made it up. Like, it's like I've had that, like that conversation, like them talking about and referencing video games and movies in their everyday life and everyday conversation to relate to the real world. And look, I don't think I've actually said it yet, I enjoyed this movie this time. I really did, but I was able to key in on why in the past I probably haven't enjoyed it, or at least walked away going, I wish Scott was slightly more enjoyable as a character.
Let's get back to that for a second, because like I love this movie. Like I think this movie is fantastic. And I thought you were gonna say, even just last week when you're like, I struggle with the movie, I thought you were gonna say it's the characterization of Scott, which is the thing that you might bump on. And I'm not really gonna necessarily defend that. I think it's more a case of I like that about the movie. Do you know what I mean? And it's one of those key things where it was so important, I think, that Michael Cera played that part,
Yeah.
because all of his both his sort of neuroses that he's good at showing us on screen, as well as the charisma that he's showing us on screen, must work for Scott. If any other actor was playing that character, I really think you would end up with someone who was just wall to wall unlikable and not a fun person to be around. I kind of think that Michael Cera really saves Scott from being very unlikable for the audience, which is just that perfect marriage of actor and material. So, but Scott is this hero that is not a nice person in a lot of ways. He's got this real slacker mentality. He's incredibly selfish. He is someone who is very much about mooching off other people, whether it's in his family or in his friendships or then in his relationships that he has. And he's also quite selfish in his romantic fickleness, really. You get the sense. Now, there was only one film, and I know it was based on a comic book, so there is another world of Scott Pilgrim. But if we sort of look at just the film itself, you get the feeling that he and Ramona probably aren't forever either, because Scott has this problem whereby he's so fickle romantically. He's still a child in that sort of sense, that he can't really get past his own selfishness and his own sort of wants and needs, which then you sort of say, well, okay, well, how on earth do we stand watching a full movie with this character and sort of rooting for the character? He's also brave. He's also kind at times. And I think the key thing for me with Scott is he wants to be better than that.
Yeah.
He wants to be better than that. And at the end of the film, of course, his arc, if you like, we are seeing glimpses that maybe he'll grow out of that, because it is that point in time. It's that sliver in time. It's that early 20s where you are still working it out, and it's not afraid to show us that Scott has not worked it out yet, and that hopefully he will soon. Do you know what I mean? So that he can actually turn into a functional adult in that
You're
sense.
right. With the way Michael Cera plays it and then the way the movie presents it, it very clearly shows that, hey, this isn't a hard coded kind of behavior. This is a growing up thing. He has to learn and he will learn. It very clearly shows that. And I think the way it gets around it and makes it palatable as well is the obviously absurdist nature of the story, right? Like he lives in this world that to start with is presented quite kind of just normal indie movie-ish. Like he's in a band, there's a girl he likes, all that sort of stuff. He's on the rebound. And then as soon as the League of Evil X's is introduced, we're introduced to this world where we just accept that Scott can fight. We just accept that people have powers. We just accept that she can use his subconscious as a highway that cuts 15 like kilometers off her travel time. Like all these things just kind of are presented as matter of fact. The only kind of person who even questions what is happening with more looks and signs of confusion is Scott's sister, because she's looking at, but it's more of a like the I didn't know he had it in him, not that he didn't have the ability. Like she's just like, I can't believe he's fighting this guy in the middle of this concert and nobody's reacting to it normally. And it's kind of really nice to see that moment of like juxtaposition. But yeah, the rest of the film is presented in this way of like, this is the world. People just accept it, and the audience just accepts it too.
And I think world is such a key part of the film's sensibilities, and it's a huge part of the film's success as well, is that idea that, again, much like Scott Pilgrim is a perfect match of actor and character, this world is a perfect match for Edgar Wright, the filmmaker. This is really, whoa, what a perfect marriage of this absurd, highly stylized, very specific, very pacey kind of comic book video game world, and Edgar Wright's, smash cuts and quick edits and very, very clever transitions from one scene to another scene. So I'm not sure if you had more there, but I definitely want to talk about that crazy technical brain and that vision. But what
Edgar Wright is almost a niche director too. Like, he is a director that, like, he has an audience. People go to see his movies because they're his movies. And you're right, he has a very distinct visual style. Like, Shaun of the Dead, World's End, and, wow, why am I forgetting the second one? Hot Fuzz. They all have that stylistic thing, like the clever transitions, like the smash cuts, the kind of retreading of scenes, the character reactions. They're all hallmarks of his signature style, of his kind of, like, there are directors, I think we've spoken about before, you can look at a movie and go, hey, that's a such and such movie, even if you didn't know. You can definitely do that with Edgar Wright. And I think Scott Pilgrim is such a perfect fit for that style. Like, you talk about Michael Cera being like, if it wasn't for him, Scott would be unlikable, and you can't really think of anyone else who could play Scott. I don't know anyone else who could make this movie. Like, you present this movie to 100 directors, and I think you get 100 worse films, in all honesty. His kind of grasp of all the things that go into this film and his genuine passion and love for it really shows.
It's also like, if you look at just culturally, if you look at the way that social media video content is edited now, and you look at Scott Pilgrim, you're like, hey, this was pretty ahead of its time. The idea that, like, there's text everywhere, that there's these really quick edits, that it's very sort of, sporadic and just all about very cutty, if you like. You can totally take that and you can transplant it into TikToks and into, YouTube Shorts and these sorts of social media editing trends, which again weren't around back in 2010, but in a way, this would still be very natural to view for a youth audience because they're used to consuming content like that now. So it's fascinating to actually look at it from that perspective. But just on a technical level, even for Edgar Wright, this film is kind of a masterpiece technically, because I have been known on this podcast to talk technical stuff and say, hey, this film shot on film, this one used anamorphic lenses, this used spherical lenses, let's talk about the aspect ratio, all this stuff. And I have absolutely no idea if that is interesting or not to anybody who may be listening or watching. Well, that's nice, because Scott Pilgrim versus the World, or Verse the World, I'm second guessing myself, Ben, but Scott Pilgrim versus the World breaks all of those rules. All of those rules, all of them. The aspect ratio changes constantly. They use different film formats. Sometimes they're on spherical lenses, sometimes they're on anamorphic lenses. When they go to slow motion, they're actually using high definition phantom cameras. Like, they're literally all over the map in terms of format, aspect ratio, style. Sometimes they're using spherical lenses, which don't have anamorphic lens flares, but they're adding anamorphic lens flares in with visual effects later. Like, it's literally just this insane kind of pastiche. And the cinematographer is Bill Pope, who also shot the Matrix trilogy, who also shot Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Like, he is no stranger to action cinematography. And one of the things that he talks about with this film was, he's like, yeah, that don't look for rules. Like, we didn't do rules on this one. Like, we just did what we needed to do in order to actually get this vision across. And it is just nuts. And it's awesome. Like, I love it so much, because if you're interested in the technical side of filmmaking and interested in all of those different choices, every scene has something to pull at, to look at, to think about with regard to why have they done that thing in this sequence? Okay, it's kind of like, and then you might reference XYZ or a different film or something like that. But it's very, very fun to watch it if you're interested in that technical side of
And I
film.
think most importantly, it serves a purpose. Like you could do
Mm.
all those things, you could break all those rules for no reason, and I think you get a bad product. But even within the world itself, it represents, the comic book nature. It represents Scott's character, even in his nature of like, you talk about, the changes of lenses and the changes of filming techniques and the changes of cameras even used in certain films. That all goes to like, hey, each X has a different theme, so each X should look a little different or present a little different when they do their thing. Like, it fits within the world being constructed. It's not someone just going, I want to be experimental. It's someone going, hey, I can be experimental because it works. Like, and it really does. Like, I noticed the aspect ratios this time. Like, and it's not something I usually pay a lot of attention to unless I've seen something quite a few times. And the average audience doesn't know it either. Like, especially when it changes often or a few times. You'll notice it if a film makes a deliberate choice partway through to change because, hey, the atmosphere or the scene's changed. But yeah, in this one here, it's quite interesting the way it presents those things. And you look at even modern comic book movies now. I don't know whether it's a direct choice, but there's definitely influence from this film. There's definitely choices that were made here that have either been replicated or the same choices have been made in modern comic book films.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think as well, the thing that I really love about this film is the execution of all of those things is absolutely outstanding. Like when you look at just, let's call it the kung fu
Yeah.
in this movie, it is, Matrix original trilogy, I should say, original trilogy Matrix level. It's great. Like it's so fantastic. I believe that the Jackie Chan stunt team was involved in actually creating, some of these sequences. Actors did bits and pieces, and then of course doubles did the more complicated stuff. But it is seamless and it is really, really, really well done. So that combination of Edgar Wright, Bill Pope, and careful planning led to some just straight up outstanding action sequences. And in a way, you're like, well, they didn't really, they shouldn't be that good with this slacker movie from, set in Toronto with, about bands who, and hey, he can inexplicably fight. Like the action shouldn't be as good as it is. And it's fantastic. If you're just an action junkie, you should like this movie because it's got some really great stuff in it. So
It's almost like Juno meets a Jackie Chan movie. Like if you like go for the theme of like just kind of that indie kind of teen young adult film, and then suddenly there is good kung fu. And it is like it'd be jarring maybe if someone came into that not expecting it. But if you follow the ride, you're gonna have a good time.
Absolutely. So I like all of the portrayals here, I should say, as well. I think everyone's great. It's like Mae Whitman's fantastic. I laugh at pretty much everything she says. I think that Michael Cera's good. I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Ellen Wong, everybody, like, Chris Evans playing this over the top, character of this sort of, alpha male. And then I have to say, though, genius casting of Jason Schwartzman as the big boss level. Do you know what I mean? If you look at someone who you're like, who is unexpected as the biggest bad for these exes, but is also completely perfect. And Jason Schwartzman fits that bill. This idea that he is someone who is massive in a very specific context of the indie film scene. Do you know what I mean? And then you take him outside of that and people are like, who is he? Like, do you know what I
He
mean?
looks familiar, but
A certain aspect of society is like, what? You be quiet. That's Jason Schwartzman. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, which is why it's perfect for Scott Pilgrim. But sorry, continue.
he just plays that unlikable very well. Like that unlikable like if you describe that character to someone, oh, he's a successful indie music mogul, there was this girl who was obsessed with him, and they broke apart and all that sort of stuff. nothing in that is unlikable until the evil exes thing, right? But even when you first meet him and you don't know that he's controlling her or all that sort of stuff and manipulative, he's like, you don't like him. You don't like his face. You don't like him. And you don't know why, but you know you're not meant to like him. And that's a hard thing to do for an actor because, like, spoilers, most actors want to be liked. Like, it's why they became actors. And he does it so well. And yeah, he's fantastic. Question, this leads me to, who is your favorite evil ex?
That's so hard. Oh, I like lots of them. I think probably I love the reveal of
Seven evil exes?
Ramona's hammer.
Oh, okay.
Like, and so when Ramona gets in the fight and she just draws this giant sledgehammer out, it's like a new level of absurdity that I am just totally on board with. And I think there's something about like a giant sledgehammer as a weapon that I just am fully on board with. So, like I said, at the very start of this podcast, I was like, Matthew Patel is hilarious. Like, and all of his little, weird kind of like shoulder shakes and like, Chris Evans is great. Like, I struggle to pick a best evil ex, definitely. But that reveal of the giant sledgehammer always stays with me. That's a moment where I'm like, yes, like every time. So
She's definitely one of my favorites because she's only one of two exes that are actually foreshadowed. That's quite fun. Like, it's enjoyable. My favorite is maybe her or Lucas. I enjoy those two characters quite a lot. I think the Lucas fight is the most entertaining fight as far as like
yeah.
the directions it takes, the stunt doubles, the finish of it, and things like that. I quite enjoy. I also, I don't know why, but I really enjoy the whole vegan police thing because
Yes.
it's like story wise, it's like, well, how does Scott get out of this? And it's like, Deus Ex Machina. Like, there's vegan police and they take powers if you eat non-vegan things. And I'm like, that's very fun. And was that one of those cops? Is it? I forgot to look it up. What's his
It's
name?
Tom
Tom
Jane.
Jane. Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, is that the Punisher?
It's randomly Tom Jane.
Like, it feels like Tom Jane was just around on set, and they're like, hey man, do you just want to be this character?
Yeah, that feels like someone's in Toronto.
Yeah.
And
And hey, I know
they're just
Thomas
like,
Jane. Do you just want him in this?
just chuck him in.
The other thing I want to talk about is I don't know if people enjoy this as much as I do. I love it when movie studios, and they didn't used to do it as much. This is like, it has now probably become too saturated. I love when a movie studio used to alter their starting logo to match the theme of the film. And Scott Pilgrim does this in a big way with like the 8-bit music and the pixelated graphics. And I went on a bit of a deep dive on like, when did this start? And look, it kind of started in a small way back between the transition of color and black and white film, right? Like, some logos for a little while stayed, black and white, and then the first few ones were transitioned to color. That was the first one of them kind of matching the film. But what is your first big memory of a movie studio adapting their logo to fit a film?
It's probably, well, it's tough because there's sort of two versions of this. There's a true logo takeover, and then there's also just a transition, like a clever transition.
Yep.
I would sort of say the first transition that I remember was The Mummy from 1999,
Yeah.
where it was Universal again, and it's the giant world, and it sort of turns into the sun. But that's not really a logo takeover, it's just a logo transition. So I probably would say I remember more logo transitions than straight up
In the
takeovers.
90s, there
But
were three huge ones, right? There was Waterworld, there was The
right.
Matrix, and there was The Mummy. They were like the three big ones that, yeah, they altered or they turned into or they kind of transitioned. But apparently, I looked this up, it really kicked off or started in the 70s and 80s with like Superman, Blade Runner, and Batman. They were the first kind of bigger films where it wasn't just a palette or it wasn't just hey, like an updating to the thing. It was this really big change. I don't know why I love it so much, but I genuinely do. And I think I'm going to deep dive on this, and I might even present my own kind of scripted short on this one, because it's something
Do
that I
it.
find some passion for, at least interest for.
Love it. Look, I have heartily enjoyed the trip down memory lane with Scott Pilgrim. Why don't you tell the good people of the interwebs where to find us, and then I will tell you what we're doing next week.
Hey, some people think we're a little bit niche. Some people think we're a little bit generational. But if you want to spread the love or you want to find more of us, you can do so in a few places. YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. If you look up Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures, you will find us in those 3 locations. When you do, please like, follow, comment, subscribe. Let us know what niche movies you love. Let us know what movie logos you love. We'd love to hear from you. We love to engage with you, and we find it genuinely very, very enjoyable. If you want to find us on social media, you can do so in 2 places: Instagram, Jim_and_Ben, or TikTok, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. So, Jim, hit me with.
All right. Well, I think you're going to like this one because I felt it was time. And can I just say as well, this dovetails, I think, beautifully to your point about movie logo reveals and transitions, because this movie has a doozy of one. I'm not going to bury the lead any further. We're going to head back to 2005 and we're going to watch Joss Whedon's Serenity.
Yeah.
So
I love this movie.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've seen Serenity. I have seen it a fair bit, but I'm looking forward to diving in again and looking at it with some fresh eyes. So
I am
hopefully
super keen.
Love it. All right. Well, we'll see you next week for some Serenity.
See you, everyone. Thank you very much.